You really think you can handle a pressurized cabin at altitude, old man? The voice was sharp, laced with smug impatience, cutting through the humming wind on the flight ramp. The wind at Nellis Air Force Base carried a thin layer of sand across the concrete, brushing against rows of aircraft that shimmered under the Nevada sun. Ground crews moved with practiced efficiency, voices blending with the distant roar of jet turbines. Near a maintenance stand, a cluster of young aviators gathered around a man who looked entirely out of place among their crisp flight suits. He stood slightly hunched, hands folded behind his back, wearing a faded jacket and scuffed boots that had seen more sky than any of them realized. His gray hair was clipped short, his posture steady, and his presence oddly quiet, almost too quiet for a man surrounded by so much noise. Lieutenant Trey Dawson smirked as he stepped closer, his freshly shined wings catching the sunlight. The others watched, sensing the imbalance, the tension, and the moment before a spark catches fire. Dawson's voice cut deeper than he intended. The old man didn't flinch. Nobody expected the old man to answer without fear. Dawson circled him like a hawk tracking wounded prey. "You're holding up the prep cycle, sir," he said, the word "sir" wrapped in sarcasm. "This area is restricted. We don't run guided tours for retirees." Several pilots snickered. A few crew chiefs exchanged uneasy glances, but no one stepped in. The pressure of military hierarchy weighed heavy, even when misused. The old man, quiet and still, shifted his gaze to the distant mountains instead of responding. That irritated Dawson even more. "Are you deaf or just slow?" he pushed. "We've got real pilots prepping for a high-altitude escort flight today. No offense, but you look more like someone's grandfather who wandered off from the visitor center." The old man simply breathed out, slow and controlled, the way someone does when they've survived things nobody in that circle could imagine. A younger airman tugged Dawson's sleeve. "Sir, maybe just let him pass. And give him special treatment?" Dawson scoffed. "What's he going to do? Teach us about back-in-my-day flight levels?" Most laughed again, uneasy but still laughed. A faint hum rose as two F-35 engines spooled up nearby. Heat shimmered across the ramp. The old man's eyes flicked toward them, just briefly, but in that split second, his expression changed. Not awe. Not curiosity. Recognition. It was the first hint that something was deeply out of balance in this confrontation. Someone finally noticed the old man was studying those jets like old friends. Dawson noticed the glance and pounced. "Don't tell me you think you know those birds, Grandpa. Those aren't museum props." The old man said nothing. "Heard you were asking about pressurization systems earlier," Dawson pressed. "What exactly do you think you're doing here?" Silence again. And that silence, unbothered and unafraid, irritated the young lieutenant more than any comeback could have. It was the stillness of someone who'd lived through storms far more violent than arrogance. One of the crew chiefs stepped forward. "Lieutenant, I think he's cleared to be here. I saw him talking with Ops earlier." Dawson waved him off. "Ops handles logistics. I handle pilots. And I don't need a relic wandering into briefing spaces." A small group gathered, drawn by the tension. Everyone felt the wrongness of it. Everyone also felt the weight of rank and kept their mouths shut. Then Dawson leaned in too close. "You want to know what it's like at 28,000 feet? He whispered. "It's not a place for men past their expiration date." The old man finally turned his head and looked directly at him. The kind of look that stripped away bravado, uniforms, and youth. A quiet, measured stare, not challenging but assessing. Like a pilot checking weather before deciding whether a storm is survivable. For a heartbeat, Dawson faltered. Then he forced a smirk. "Thought so," he muttered. Just another hangar lurker hoping to feel relevant. Behind them, the ground shook lightly as the F-35's power increased. A low-frequency rumble crawled across the ramp. And as heat waves rippled around the jets, something else began to ripple too. A sense that this wasn't going the way Dawson imagined. If you've ever seen arrogance about to collapse, keep listening quietly. Then a shadow fell over them, belonging to someone Dawson didn't expect. The sound of firm, purposeful footsteps cut through the jet noise. A tall figure in a command-level flight suit approached, carrying the authority of someone who didn't need to raise his voice to command an entire flight line. Colonel Ryan Mercer, commander of the escort wing. Conversations halted. Crew chiefs straightened. Pilots snapped into posture. Dawson swallowed, then plastered on a professional smile. "Colonel," he said quickly, "I was just removing a civilian from the restricted flight area." But Mercer didn't look at him. He looked at the old man. Not in confusion. Not in annoyance. But with a flicker of recognition he tried and failed to hide. "Sir," Mercer said softly, almost respectfully. The young aviators glanced at each other. Sir? Did he really say sir? Mercer stepped closer. His tone lowered. I didn't expect you here. Dawson's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. He'd never seen Mercer speak to anyone like that outside a general. The old man still hadn't spoken. The colonel's jaw tightened with a sudden understanding, one that unsettled even him. Lieutenant Dawson, Mercer said, eyes still locked on the old man, step back. Sir? I said step back. The words landed like a hammer, and Dawson obeyed without another sound. A strange, electric tension swept through the entire group as Colonel Mercer's posture shifted. Not dominant, not defensive. Reverent. And that reverence told everyone this wasn't just any old man. Colonel Mercer exhaled slowly, searching the old man's eyes as if confirming something impossible. The pilots watched, curiosity gnawing at their composure. Dawson's earlier smirk had evaporated entirely. Sir, Mercer began carefully, if you're here because of the flight, we didn't receive notification. The old man gave a faint nod. Are you observing? Mercer asked. Another slight nod. That was enough. Mercer's face drained of color. The old man lifted his right hand slightly, just enough to reveal a faded scar along the ridge of his palm. A strangely patterned burn, almost geometric. Only one group of pilots in the world carried those scars. Survivors of the 2007 emergency at 28,000 feet, when a catastrophic system failure nearly killed an entire crew. One man had kept them alive. Dawson noticed it and frowned. What's that from? A cooking accident. Mercer shot him a look so sharp it could have cut metal. The old man then brushed the edge of his jacket aside, revealing a patch, worn, barely readable, but unmistakable to someone who knew its history. Call sign, frostbite. Mercer inhaled sharply. Sir, I didn't know you were still flying missions. The pilots and crew exchanged startled whispers. Frostbite. A classified legend. A name spoken in stories, not schedules. Dawson's bravado flickered like a candle in the wind. He glanced between Mercer and the old man. Wait, frostbite? As in, the frostbite? The old man didn't confirm. But the silence confirmed everything. Mercer straightened, spine rigid. Lieutenant, you have no idea who you're speaking to. Dawson's throat tightened. Something inside the old man's presence shifted, something colder, deeper, and far more powerful than anyone expected. And that was when the rest of the base began to realize who stood before them. Colonel Mercer stepped back just enough to give the old man space, like one gives space to a storm forming. The surrounding air seemed to sharpen. Even the F-35 engines felt quieter for a moment, like the base itself was listening. Lieutenant, Mercer said, voice low but carrying across the ramp, you just insulted the man who saved an entire aircrew at 28,000 feet. Whispers erupted. Mercer continued, he held a failing aircraft together long enough for every single one of his people to live. 180 souls owe him breath. The old man still didn't move, his face unreadable. And when the escorts arrived, F-35 prototypes, they recognized his call sign before they even saw his face. Because he'd flown with them on missions no one talks about publicly. Dawson's face paled. The old man's eyes, steady and cold like the high-altitude stratosphere he once lived in, finally lifted to meet Mercer's. Mercer nodded. Permission granted. The old man reached into his jacket and withdrew a thin, metallic identification card, unlike any the pilots had seen. Its edges were beveled, its surface engraved with a symbol reserved for special authority aviators cleared for classified atmospheric testing. He held it out wordlessly. Mercer accepted it with both hands, a gesture used only for highly decorated personnel, and turned it so the sunlight revealed the name. Commander Elias Ward, call sign, Frostbite. Decorated high-altitude rescue specialist. Survivor of the 28,000-foot incident. A shockwave of silence rolled across the group. Dawson stepped back involuntarily. Sir, I didn't know. No, Mercer said. You didn't? But you should have shown respect anyway. Elias Ward eased the ID back into his jacket, the motion smooth and controlled, like someone who had spent a lifetime moving deliberately at altitudes where every motion matters. People around them straightened without meaning to. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. If this moment hit heavier than you expected, linger for the next breath. Because Dawson still hadn't faced the consequences, only the truth. Dawson's chest tightened as the weight of what he'd done settled like cold iron. The other pilot stepped back, giving the young lieutenant space, not out of loyalty but out of caution. No one wanted to be near the blast radius of a mistake this large. The base felt unnaturally quiet. Even the F-35 seemed to idle lower. Elias Ward didn't glare at Dawson. He didn't lecture. He simply watched him with the calm of someone who'd stared down engine fires, decompression, and the thin edge between life and sky. That calm broke Dawson more than anger ever could. "Commander Ward," Dawson stammered. "Sir, I sincerely—" Elias raised a hand. Not to silence. Too steady. The gesture was small, but its power was immense, like a pilot leveling wings in turbulence. Dawson swallowed hard, shame finally overtaking embarrassment. Around them, the young airman realized something else. This wasn't a confrontation anymore. It was a lesson. A painful, necessary one. One pilot whispered, "That's the guy who kept breathing after the cabin exploded." Another murmured, "He flew through the freezing stratosphere with a failing mask, and kept everyone alive." Dawson closed his eyes briefly. He had mocked the man who had done the impossible. Elias looked at him with the kind of weary understanding that comes from decades of watching young pilots learn the hard way. He didn't speak, but his silence held every truth Dawson needed. And that silence pushed Dawson toward the only thing left: accountability. Colonel Mercer stepped forward, jaw tight, posture formal. "Lieutenant Dawson," he said, voice steady but unforgiving. "You will report to my office immediately after this sortie. Your conduct today was unacceptable. Disrespect toward any civilian is bad enough. Disrespect toward a decorated commander is disgraceful." Dawson nodded stiffly, throat dry. "And until further notice," Mercer continued, "you're grounded from lead positions. You will shadow Captain Ruiz until I determine your judgment is fit for operational responsibility." Dawson's shoulders sank. His rank didn't protect him now. "But before you go," Mercer added, softening just barely, "you will address Commander Ward properly." Dawson turned to Elias, face flushed with remorse. "Commander Ward, I apologize deeply for my behavior. I spoke without understanding. Without respect. I'm truly sorry." The old man's expression didn't shift, but he offered a slow, almost imperceptible nod. Mercer exhaled, relieved. "Understood. Now prepare for launch." Elias remained still, eyes on Dawson, not harsh, not forgiving. Just present. But the moment wasn't over, not until Elias chose to speak. The wind swept softly across the flight line as crews resumed motion. But the circle around Elias Ward stayed quiet, waiting. Finally, the old commander stepped closer to Dawson, just one step, and spoke his first full sentence of the entire encounter. His voice was low, weathered, and steady. "Son, altitude doesn't test your lungs." Dawson looked up, blinking. Elias continued, eyes steady, "It tests your character." The words hit like a shockwave, quiet but devastating. Elias placed a hand briefly on Dawson's shoulder. Not forgiveness. Not condemnation. Guidance given from someone who'd earned the right to offer it. Then he turned toward the F-35s, the engines humming softly under the rising heat. The pilots watched him walk, understanding something unspoken. Greatness doesn't shout. It simply stands there and the world adjusts around it. If this moment stayed with you, share it forward so others remember too. And with one final gesture, Elias signaled the end of the lesson. Elias paused at the edge of the flight ramp, the sun outlining his silhouette. For a moment, the world seemed to shift, colors dimming, the air thinning like a flashback color wash. A low, distant rumble echoed across the sky as the F-35s began taxiing. Their shadows swept across him, long and sharp, like wings saluting an old guardian of altitude. He lifted two fingers to his temple in a quiet greeting, the kind only pilots surviving the stratosphere ever used. Then he walked away into the shimmering heat. Not vanishing. Just returning to the sky that had never quite let him go. Some legends never retire, they simply rise above the noise.